What's up, ladies and gentlemen, and welcome to part 2 of Sessions. You best grab yourself a seat because this one, whew, it's gonna be a doozy. In this episode, we're going to be going over how I do my drums and how I program my electronics. From glitched out beats and crazy computer sounds. Now, if you came here after watching part 1, welcome back. If you're new and you haven't seen part 1, then this may be a little confusing. But all that aside, you'll still get the basics of how I do what I do. Drums. Let's talk about drums. Drums are legitimately my favorite instrument. 95% of the time, no matter what you do, you can't help but being loud as hell. But it gives me a good avenue to go into beating the shit out of something and calling it art. Now, unlike recording guitars, recording drums are a little bit different. Like I said previously, it's not always about having the most expensive equipment to get the kind of sound you're going for. But with drums, having a nicer quality shell is ultimately going to be one of the main factors in what gets you a better quality sound. On top of that, the mics, recording room, and the environment that you're tracking in is what all is going to come down to getting you the sounds and samples that you need for recording. But before we jump into all that, let's take it back a little bit so I can explain to you guys where I came from and how a lot of this even began. Story time with Reed. So when I first started playing drums, I remember going to my parents in some way making it seem like we were buying a drum set for someone else when in all reality we were buying it for me, because I knew that in no way, shape, or form my parents were going to want to have me beating the shit out of drums every single day in their house when I was a young kid in high school. And although I'm pretty sure that my dad knew better, they ended up buying me the kit anyways, and as you can imagine, soon thereafter, I probably became the most hated person in the neighborhood. Because I was bad. Legitimately bad. I was terrible, awful, like unexplainably bad. I remember that I would sit in my room and play like Jimmy Eats World music on repeat again and again and think that I was like learning something by doing the same beat every single day for like a month in a row. But I tried and I loved what I was doing, and that's really what it came down to. I remember trying out for multiple bands, being told that I sucked, being told that I should play bass guitar instead of any other instrument. No offense to the bass players out there. I remember trying out for talent shows with a buddy of mine and not even making it past like the first review. I was that bad. At one point, I almost bought into everything that everybody was saying and gave up on the one thing that I enjoyed doing. But I remember waking up one day and thinking to myself, yo, I want to be in a band like Paramore. So I ended up hitting up my neighbor at the time, Michael Matajic, as you guys might know as the guitarist of Machines. And at the time, we got together to start a local band in hopes of finding a female vocalist to start a Paramore-like band. Next thing you know, a buddy of ours comes over who's a synth player, and we ended up making a song that we entitled Heavy Song, because at the time there wasn't really any heavy bands. It was bands like Scary Kids Scaring Kids or Horse the Band, and we had no clue what we were doing. We just played what we thought was cool. So one day at band practice, we had a couple friends come over and we ended up playing our joke song, which in some way ended up being our main song, and then thus we became the local band We Are Kings. Now look, this doesn't get away from the point that I was still terrible at drums. I was awful. Even at this point, I was still bad. And even back then, I think that I was playing on some like $150 sound percussion kit from Guitar Center. Next thing you know, we're headlining the local shows and going to studios to record singles. Thus, fast forward a couple years, and We Are Kings ends up changing a few members and then becoming Of Machines, which Of Machines was my first actual signed touring band. And by then, I had had a couple years of learning how not to suck so bad. I still sucked, but I sucked a little bit less. And next thing you know, I'm thrown into the studio recording a full album when I had only been drumming for a couple years at most. And hey, at the time, maybe it was good. But me looking back at it now, it could have been a little better. But all joking aside, for the time, it really helped me learn what I could do differently on percussion, as well as what I could do differently as a musician. Now, I don't know how long it was in Machines, maybe like a year, year and a half, maybe 2 years at the most, but ended up parting ways with the band, having musical differences, getting kicked out on the side of the road and left in California, expected to fly home. So after that, I think that me and my tour manager ended up skipping the parking lot with like car full of chicks and a bunch of booze and a whole bunch of parties for like 3 days. Next thing you know, I'm flying back to Atlanta from California, and I end up going in to get my hair cut at the local hair salon, thus meeting Corey Ferris, the bassist of Woe Is Me, that was working there as a receptionist. And I'd already known of Corey and the other guys because they had came from the local band that basically competed with my local band and we were like the two rival local bands in the area. So I ended up hearing from Corey that he's still working with Kevin, which was the guitarist of Cheyenne Stokes, when ironically, on the way back from California, I was already thinking in my head who I'd want to work with back from the local scene so I could get my ass back out on tour. And what did you know? Kevin Hansen was at the top of that list. A couple days went by and I finally got to hear a little bit of what they had been working on, and that's where I kind of started changing my mindset and viewpoints on things as a musician and as a drummer. One of the limitations I always had on myself as a drummer is that I always depended so much on the instruments around me in order for me to feel comfortable stepping outside of my shell. When in all reality, sometimes it kind of depended on me to do more where others were doing less, because that's just the mathematics of writing a song. But back then, I didn't know what I knew now, and so I was just kind of running into everything blindfolded. But it wasn't until we started writing As Woe As Me that I was really able to finally hone in on my niche as a drummer. It also helped that the music I was writing to was badass, experimental, wasn't repetitious, and it always gave me a chance to come up with something new and better as the song progressed. Alright, so my point is that even if you're sitting there right now asking yourself, how the hell am I ever gonna be able to do this? Or I can't play that song, or I can't play like this guy or that guy. That's not really what it's all about. Granted, yes, I had people that I idolized and people that I looked up to when I was writing music or playing drums in general, but at the end of the day, it was me kind of finding my own sound and my own style that led me to finding any type of confidence when it came to playing, especially on a stage. I'm by no means the best drummer. I have tons of room for improvement, and there is so many other things that are out there that I could take the time to learn that I wish I would have taken the time to learn, and that I probably could have implemented into the songs to make them even crazier than they already were. But times passed and I did the best that I could at that time, and within all that failure and all those mistakes, I was finally able to make a living off something that at one point I was horrible at. But it didn't come easy. It was nothing but hard work, being embarrassed, being demoralized, hated every decision I was making, couldn't even stand to look in the mirror at myself, but for some reason, I just didn't stop doing it. Ultimately, at the end of the day, I think a lot of what came down to it was the friends and the people that I had around me. For example, one of my best friends who eventually became my tour manager, this kid believed in me like more than anyone, and I was terrible. I wasn't even writing good music, but for some reason this dude just fucking believed that we were gonna fucking be touring the world someday. And no matter what I told him, no matter how down I was, and no matter what I showed him, he was so stoked on everything that I showed him, which in the end made me feel stoked about myself and what I was doing. And therefore I wanted to get better and progress more and more, so ultimately I could really take us on tour to see the world. But I knew that I was only going to get better with practice, and I wasn't ever gonna know success until I knew failure. But my point is that don't stop. Don't stop. Just don't stop. If you love what you do and you believe that it's what you want to do for the rest of your life, or at least for a good portion of your life, then just keep doing it. And eventually, hopefully, you'll find yourself in the direction that you're going in. And when you do find yourself, that's when you're finally able to stop looking at the ground and start reaching for the stars. And with story time out of the way, let's get back on track and teach you guys how to do things the way I do while sitting at your desk in your own house. So get yourself a piece of paper or a pen, or perhaps you're one of those people who can just watch something and remember like 500 words at a set of like 500 miles an hour and somehow come out with some great idea that's gonna build up in your head and make you think of how you did it all. That way you can sit here and realize that you know everything before you even watch this video. But I'm not one of those people. So just like the last video, let's hop over to the rig and let me show you how I do what I do. Alright guys, and now that we got the audio software loaded up, let's break it down to exactly how I do my percussion. On a side note, one of the things you may notice while I've been recording these videos is that I currently live in an apartment, meaning there's no way in hell I'm ever going to be able to perform live drums in an apartment complex, because my ass would be gone before I even get a chance to record. So in those instances, that's where things like electronic kits really are a big help. But not everybody has the money to afford electronic kits, so the next best thing is for you to already have pre-recorded samples of your drums or other drums that you prefer available for when you're at home recording or in an environment that doesn't allow you to record live performed drums. In my case, that's exactly what's going on here. I was blessed enough to get every single sample that I'd ever recorded from Cameron at Shingo Studios, whether it be from shells, to bells, to cymbals, to direct mics, to room mics, to anything you could imagine. This guy always went above and beyond to make anything happen. So with that being said, let me break it down for you on how exactly I go about doing drums whether I'm in an environment that doesn't allow me to record live drums, or whether I'm on the road or traveling. One of the main things about drums, especially in a professional studio environment, the majority of all drums on an album will have multiple live tracks that are usually blended in with samples of the same drums that are being played, but bled to be able to give you a perfect sounding percussion kit. And know that there are people out there who want a more natural sound, and for them, this type of application or implementation of samples isn't going to give them the sound that they're looking for. Because no matter what you do, there's always going to be a defining difference between natural, live, all mic'd, just pre-recorded drums, or somebody that goes in and plays the parts, but then also has the samples of their same drums overlaid to give them a full, more perfect hit every time. Now, just like the guitar and bass, I'm going to be going through this song, showing you guys what samples I blended together to get the drums sounding the way I did, as well as any type of equalization or after effects that I put on the drums to give them the sound that I was looking for. In this case, I'm going to play through this part of the song and just let you guys hear the drums soloed out away from all the other instruments to get an idea of what they sound like. Alright, and just like with the bass, I use Native Instruments Contact VST. This VST allows me to pretty much work with any type of samples as far as going in and fine-tuning any samples to get them sounding exactly the way I want to in a cohesive unit. In this case, I'm going to be showing you guys all the different types of samples that I use just to get one kick drum sounding the way I want it to. As you can see here, I have multiple different kick drums, whether it be a Thop kit from Chango, whether it be Capture the Crown's kick, Woe Is Me kick, Memphis May Fire kick, Palisades kicks, and on top of that, I also have different mics for those kicks, whether it be a direct mic, whether it be a room mic, whether it be a freaking mic in outer space, whatever it may be, I have all these different options to be able to blend in the sound or direction that I'm going for in that one particular part of the song or particular sound. Now, in my case, I've been extremely blessed to be given all of these samples from Cameron at Chango, let alone to be able to have some of the samples that I myself performed and recorded to be able to work with in my own house and home. But it doesn't really matter where you get your samples from. There's multiple packs out there that are available. There's multiple companies that sell individual samples or individual percussion pieces that you may want to hear in a song. All that matters is that you get the samples or the sound that you yourself are aiming for. After you've gotten your samples, what it came down to for me was going in and individually heightening and lowering each sample or sound that I was blending to give myself the best possible sound for that specific instrument when it came to working with samples. As you can see in my case, I have multiple different volumes that are dialed in, whether it be for the direct mics or room mics for each of these individual kicks to come in at different parts throughout the song. That way I can always keep up a little bit of variation and have it sounding more human-like and less computer generated. So let's hop back over to Ableton and show you guys what the kick is like soloed out, as well as a little bit of equalization to the top and bottom end. Okay, so before we jump back into the song, I want to take a moment to stress one of the most important things about working with samples, and that is velocity. Changing the velocity of a sample is going to give you a different sound of the sample. Yes, it's ultimately the same foundation, but it's more or less showing you how hard or how soft a sample is going to be perceived by the listener. And in some cases, some sample packs actually offer a different play style based upon the velocity that you set that sample to be played at. So in my case, to keep things a little simple, I just went through and added a little bit of velocity change to each and every kick drum throughout this basic part of the song, just to kind of give it more of a human feel opposed to a less computer generated response. And you can hear that here. With that being a simple part in the song, I still went through and did my best to add a little bit of variation to the kicks so it wasn't the same punching you in the side of the face sound throughout the entire section, let alone throughout the entire song. Like I stressed with the guitars and bass, one of the main deciding factors in anything you do comes down to the equalization that you are going to provide for that said sample or instrument. In my case, I'm going to show you what these same kicks sound like with no equalization, and then a clip again of what they sound like with the EQ on. So this is the kicks with no EQ. And this is that same clip, but with the kicks dialed into the EQ that I was looking for. As you can see, with any sound or any instrument, changing the EQ can drastically change how the sound or wavelength is going to be perceived by the listener. But what it all comes down to is your personal preference in the sound, music, or color that you're going for when it comes to your music. So remember, as we go through each individual part of the drum set, all of these are going to be having an EQ provided to them to make them sound and form to the way that I want them to sound. Next up is the snare. Just like my kick, I have various snares all laid out in my library, allowing me to go through and choose which ones I like, which ones I don't like, or which ones I may want more of in the mix to give my snare the sound that I'm looking for. So with me going through having some up or some down, this is the overall sound that I got with the different mics provided on my samples. As I hope that you hear, just like with the kicks, one of the main factors is going through and changing the velocity of different hits while you're playing a part to make sure it comes across as human-like as possible. Next up on the drum set, just like my snare and kick, would be my toms. Now, the toms are done the same way, with you going through and selecting what type of samples you're wanting to sound or blend together. In my case, I'm using a lot of the samples from the Genesis album, as well as other kits that have been recorded at the studio. Alright, let's talk cymbals. When it comes to cymbals, you can argue whether they're the easiest or the most difficult samples to really acquire. Meaning that there are tons of samples out there when it comes to trying to get a crash, or a ride, or a hi-hat, or anything of that nature. But what it really comes down to is tuning in to your personal preference. Now, just like with shells, the cymbals require the same type of attention when it comes to the velocity of each sample being used. So I'm going to show you a short little playthrough of just the cymbals, which might be a little piercing to the ears, but you'll be able to see all the different types of bells and whistles that are used to really bring in an entirely different sound and approach to the cymbals used on a traditional kit. As you could hear, the different velocities in those samples really gave them more of a human approach, opposed to being a piercing, loud, beating you in the side of the face sound that was just going over and over again. Playing cymbals by themselves can seem kind of empty when it comes to trying to play something back. But when you put them together with all the other instruments and all the other drums that are being played, you get a really beautiful coordination of sound that really brings out your signature approach to percussion. One last little tip about percussion samples is that I always like to go back through and add things like bells or whistles or tambourines or shakers or anything that I can to kind of lively up the environment when it comes to things that may be a standard playthrough chorus that may have you playing the same beat in a repetitious style. For example, things like that added over a two-step or a simple pattern really give it just a little bit more flair. Aside from other percussion instruments, I also like to go through and make sure I put all types of reverse snares, reverse cymbals, or just reverse sounds in general to really highlight some parts of the song as they come in. For example, that right there was just my snare sample reversed to give it that more of an in-depth, hard-hitting effect as the breakdown comes in. It's that simple. Sometimes it's just those little things that can really make some parts that are bland a little bit more impactful. Now that we got the samples and plugins out of the way, let's take a moment to step back and look at how exactly I go about writing and thinking of the drum parts that I do, let alone the fills and transitions when it comes to working with each section. One of the main things that I like doing, especially in a part that's going to be 4 to 8 measures long of a repetitious rhythm, I like to do everything I can as a percussionist to be able to sit back and change what I'm playing while still keeping the overall feel of the song the same. For example, with the start of the song being very fast-paced, I wanted to do my best to continue that feel while not having to be stuck playing the same thing for the entire count of the intro of the song. As you can see right here, I went ahead and soloed out one guitar with the drums to give you an idea of how the drums, cymbals, or fills are changing throughout this starting point while still keeping the same overall feel of the intro of this song. As you can see with guitar, that rhythm was played over and over again, but yet the song felt like it was changing, although in all reality, it really wasn't. The only thing that was changing was a few of the glitches in the guitars here and there, but primarily the drums were giving the song a different feel while still keeping it relative to the way the song started. That's something that I like to do regardless of what section of the song it is. Whether it's an intro, a verse, a pre-chorus, or a chorus, I always try to do my best to not be repeating the same thing the entire span of that section. The only time that I will repeat something, obviously, is going to be in any type of breakdown or pattern section. And even then, I still do my best to add in fills and transitions without taking away from the impact of the breakdown. One of the other things I like to do, which is dependent on kind of the BPM and the overall feel of the song, is to go through and give myself an idea of what types of fills and transitions that I can do within this BPM that's going to be available to me throughout the song. I like to see all of my options while going into sections so I can know if there's a fill that best represents or best fits a section that's fixing to come up. With doing that, I'm actually able to go through the song and sometimes mix and match fills that might be in another position, but just because I know they're going to fit here, I also know that more than likely they're going to fit there as well. But let's take a second to look at the few fills that's within this 1 minute section. Now, as you can probably hear, there's already a good 4 to 5 different styles of fills or transitions within this 1 minute section. That's one of the main factors that I always try to aim for, no matter what part of the song that I'm working on. I like to be able to highlight all the different options and things that I have in my arsenal to be able to add to the song and give it a little bit of flair when it may be missing somewhere else, or at times die it down when something else in the song needs to be highlighted. Speaking of dying down a little bit to allow something else to shine, doing a simple transition as far as following the panning of the guitars, in this example where I do a quad on snare and then a quad on kick, is something so simple and small, but it allows the breakdown that comes after it to be that much more impactful. It's really that simple. Something so small can make the next thing that's coming that much bigger. And with that, drum fills don't always have to be some crazy machine gun sounding thing. Sometimes the simplicity behind something is what can make the thing that comes after it that much more important. One last little side note about drums to keep in mind is that just as much as you have your drums or your shells to do fills, also note that your cymbals are just as much of an extension to your drum set as your shells are, as anything else you could possibly want to incorporate when it comes to doing drum fills or transitions. Sometimes replacing a snare with a bell or 2 toms with a splash and a crash can make a big enough of a sound and have a really cool impact when it comes to a fill. It's a little food for thought. Okay, and with drums out of the way, let's take a sidestep to talk about some electronics. Now, some of you at home may not even realize half of the time what's actually programmed or what's actually electronic opposed to what's actually live and being played in an actual studio. Being an electronic artist in this day and age is kind of a niche thing. I'm not talking like EDM or house music or any other type of stuff. I'm talking about someone like myself who has jumped far down that rabbit hole to see just how far electronics can go. And trust me, it can get into some really weird shit. Whether it be all the way back to analog modules, over here plugging in wires like you're a freaking operator, or like nowadays where everything's kind of a one-stop shop and just about everybody and their mom thinks that they're a DJ. Before I went to the metal scene, I actually spent the majority of my time idolizing and hoping to one day be the next postal service. For those of you who don't know who the postal service is, think of it kind of like Owl City. I guess that'd be the most mainstream thing I could possibly compare it to. But at the time, it was an extremely niche genre. Literally, there was like barely any artist back in that day and age who really took the time to even try to record full electronic songs. But for some reason, it caught my interest, and wouldn't you know, I spent about all my time trying to figure out how to do anything that I heard in half these songs. I, like you, have gone through just about every fucking possible audio program out there when it comes to electronics. I mean, you have like Sony Acid, you got your Fruity Loops producers, or more so nowadays, things like Ableton, which have a bazillion plugins for just about any sound you could possibly want to go for. But then you still have weird people like myself that still use programs like Propellerhead Reason, where you're literally sitting on a digital computer turning analog knobs with your mouse. If that isn't the most contradicting fucking thing, but you know what? I love it. Bet your ass I sit there turning those knobs a bazillion degrees trying to get myself sounding some special way. One of the biggest key factors about electronics is doing anything you can to make something that's kind of oversaturated or overpopulated in the market sound like your own. Because let's face it, a lot of the things that are popular have already been done, or in some way, shape, or form have yet to be discovered. And everybody's out there doing their best to copy the next guy in hopes of riding on that to the top. But for me, I just did it because it was genuinely fun. I literally had a fun time writing, finding, forming, making, and just figuring out electronics. Thus, as you can probably hear, from Of Machines to Woe Is Me, all the electronics and transitions and interlude songs and crazy things that I put over breakdowns, or crazy things that I put over songs, or in between songs, or underneath songs, or wherever I could fit something, have always in some way, shape, or form been different from the last. But I always wanted to do my best to kind of revitalize the electronic scene in hopes of other people trying it too. But within the forgotten language, I was kind of the few people, aside from bands like Sky Eats Airplane, that still even bothered to take the time to try to put them into songs. But if you ask me personally, I think some of those things are probably the coolest motherfucking things that I ever did in a song. Let alone without them, some of the parts would have never been as good. Whether it's the break beats, the rap beats from the Woe Is Me songs, whether it's some of the glitch and crazy sounding distorted drums that I had in Of Machines, down to the simplicity of like arpeggiators or synth gates or Euro gates that I had over breakdowns. Either way, so many things that I've gone and discovered have made the biggest difference in some of my favorite parts on any of the songs that I've ever written. And without that, I probably wouldn't have liked the parts as much as I did. You can either follow the leader and where you know that at least some people are gonna like what you're doing, or you can just be a complete idiot and go down some crazy path of your own like myself and hope that ultimately people are gonna even notice it. But in the end, it's those things that I truly feel personally gave our sound, or my sound in particular, its own definition. So if anybody's ever out there asking you, why do you do that? Why do you spend your time doing that? It's not even worth it. Tell them just to f off. You're doing you, and that's all that matters. And half the time, they're probably just f***ing jealous anyways. So with that, and with this, let's hop over to the rig and me show you a little bit of my secret vault when it comes to doing electronics. Before we end this session out, let's stop in and look at the electronics, or better yet, the VSTs that I use on this 1 minute segment to get the electronics sounding the way that I do. Now, there's all types of VSTs out there when it comes to electronics. Really just a matter of you either finding a song that has a sound that you like and then you researching how they got that sound, or you trying anything under the sun and making a list of the things that you best think suit what you're going for. In my case, and in this song, I'm using a plugin called Silence. I mean, the damn thing even looks like an old school keyboard. Just like with any VST, it comes with libraries or sounds that are presets on here that you can go through and bend or break or mold into the sound that you're specifically looking for. Now with this song, what I ended up doing was going through and finding an arpeggiator that I thought best sounded the way that I wanted it to sound. After I found the sound that I wanted, I then went through and started bending and mending some of the waveforms and frequencies that are allowed to be changed within this VST, therefore kind of creating my own personal sound of a preset that was available in the library that came with this VST. One of the things I like to do to just about everything, probably more than I should, is to add any type of bit crushing to the sound, or distortion for simple terms. In this case, after finding the sound that I wanted and adding the distortion, a little bit of crushing here and there to it, and messing with the EQ some, I then went through and changed the arpeggiator time to be to 1/16, which then fit the sound and the rhythm that I was going for within this breakdown. After doing that, I then wanted to take the time to figure out what notes I wanted to be played when it came to the arpeggiation. So one of the little tips that I like to do when it comes to doing open breakdowns is ultimately just to hold down the root note of the breakdown when it comes to any type of arpeggiation or sometimes any type of sample, to really hold it out over what's being played on the instruments, and you're not really going to have to run into any problems with things not being kosher. For this instrument, for example, I chose the root note of A sharp or B flat, and then I chose the octave above that to where it was able to kind of ping pong back and forth dependent on when I pressed the opposing keys on the keyboard, therefore giving it this own unique rhythm of sound that I thought was really awesome. Let's give it a listen. One of the things I also like to do when it comes to any type of samples or electronics is to mess with the pitch bending. I like to go through at the end of the samples or at the end of the waves and kind of blend them down or blend them up, whichever way I kind of want the song to go, especially which in this case, before a breakdown comes in, to pitch bend everything down like everything's just kind of falling apart. So that way when the breakdown hits in, again, just like with everything else, it's about getting that major impact. And in this case, I was able to use the electronics as a form of the transition to help make things that much more. Alright, like I said earlier, there's so many VSTs out there when it comes to electronics, but one of the main things I could tell you is don't get dragged into what everybody else says is cool, what everybody else says is great. Do your own research. Look up things, try things. A lot of things have trial periods, and just see what VST, what company, or what plugin is going to provide the types of sounds that you're looking for. Because in the end, there's usually enough manipulation provided within the VST for you to make just about any sound imaginable if you just put in the time. So yeah, that's that for this 1 minute section. That's as simple as the electronics are on this one. It's nothing too crazy, nothing too over the top. It's just enough to give it a really cool, distinct sound when it comes to filling in a breakdown that otherwise would have been a little empty. At one point, hopefully I'll be able to write an entire electronics section to really show you all out there who is interested in electronics the full process that it takes in multiple VSTs, let alone programs that I use, to get things sounding such a distinct and niche way when it comes to my signature sound. But until then, we'll just have to see what I come up with on the next track. Woo! And that concludes Drums and Electronics. In some way, I hope that I have helped someone somewhere learn that it's not just about the money you have in your pocket, the people you know, or where you come from, but it's about how hard you're willing to work and how far you're willing to go to achieve the dream that you've set out to do. I'm not the best teacher by any means, but I hope that these tips and tricks can help some of you at home be able to finally get some of the music that you've been writing out the door while also feeling confident about what you're putting out for everybody else to hear. On a side note, future episodes are going to be a little different, meaning to where I've been showing you guys the VSTs, plugins, samples, and everything else that I use to make something sound a certain way. In the next episodes, I'm just going to be able to take my time showing you how exactly I wrote and thought of the parts for each instrument of the songs that I put out on Instagram. So a little less of the basics and a little more of the intermediate. Either way, it's only going to be more exciting and more complex. So hopefully this will motivate you guys as much as it motivates me to do my best to write bigger, better, and more technical material to give you guys something worth watching and also something worth learning. So be sure to keep an eye out on my Instagram so you'll be able to hear the new track that I'm putting up for next week's session. And also, if you have any comments, ideas, or suggestions, please don't hesitate. Put them below, let's chat it up, let's see what we can come up with. And who knows, what you end up asking for may be what I do on the next session. If you have any ideas for styles, or songs, or parts of songs, or things that you want to hear me write, let me know. And I'll do my best to write a kick-ass part or two. With all that being said, don't forget to like, subscribe, give it a thumbs up, tell your friends about it, tell your dogs about it, post it online, do whatever you can to help keep me going, and I'll do my best to keep this going. And with that, like always, in case I don't see you, good morning, good evening, and good night. Peace out, guys.